What happens when a trained killer watches a robbery unfold? Right in front of him, a rogue MMA fighter thought he picked an easy target on the subway. But he didn't realize Jason Statham was just 3 seats away. It was nearly dusk when Damian, the Viper, Vassel stepped onto the grimy platform at the 42 ND Street, Bryant Park subway station, the faded hoodie over his head doing little to hide the unmistakable air of violence that clung to him like sweat. A former middleweight MMA phenom, Damian had once been the crown jewel of underground fighting circles, an apex predator in the cage whose precision strikes and ruthless aggression won fans and fear in equal measure. But it wasn't talent that undid him. It was what he did to an opponent during a bout gone wrong, a televised match that turned into a horror show. The man had been left in a coma. Sanctions followed. Sponsors dropped him. The MMA Commission stripped his license. Now Damian was a ghost walking among civilians, bitter and coiled tight like a spring, surviving off scraps, sleeping in borrowed apartments, and always simmering with rage. His fists, once celebrated, were now tools of desperation. Today, he was hunting, not for blood, but for an opportunity, the kind that could buy him a meal, a fix, or both. As the subway screeched into the station, a gust of stale air pushed across the platform, whipping his hoodie slightly. He stepped inside the car, like a predator entering a cave, his eyes scanning every face, not with curiosity, but calculation. It was late enough that the train wasn't packed, just a dozen or so riders, heads buried in phones, music, or sleep. No one paid him much attention, not even the frail old woman near the far corner, seated with a gentle poise, her white hair pinned in place, her hands clasped over a worn leather handbag that probably held everything important in her life. She reminded Damian of no one. There was no sentiment in his stare, no hesitation. She was just prey. What Damian didn't realize, not yet anyway, was that across from the old woman sat a man who noticed everything. He wore dark jeans, a black coat, and a baseball cap pulled low, sunglasses on despite the underground shadows. He looked like the kind of man who didn't want to be recognized. That was because he didn't. Jason Statham, actor and former competitive diver turned Hollywood's go-to-Hardman, was on his way to a quiet evening talk show appearance after spending the day doing promotional shoots for his latest film. He had decided to ride the subway anonymously for the thrill of normalcy. He hadn't expected real action, but years of performing stunt-heavy roles had tuned his reflexes and senses to danger, and the man who just boarded was trouble personified. Jason turned the page in his book, but watched the newcomer from behind his lenses. Damian shifted closer to the old woman, swaying with the movement of the train. He hadn't noticed Jason. Why would he? To Damian, everyone here was either a target or a bystander. He moved like a man about to test how far he could push the world before it pushed back. And the woman, with her gentle face and brittle bones, looked like she hadn't fought anything tougher than a crowded grocery aisle in years. Jason watched as the thug's body language shifted from restless to locked in. He knew that look. A decision had been made. The train plunged into the tunnel, and the lights above flickered. In that brief stutter of shadow, Damian struck. His hand snapped forward, seizing the woman's purse in one vicious yank. The motion so sudden that she didn't scream until she was already falling sideways, her shoulder slamming into the seat's armrest as her handbag was wrenched from her grip. The screech she let out was high and raw, filled with fear and humiliation. A ripple of shock moved through the car. A young man halfway through his earbuds instinctively moved, then froze. Another passenger gasped and gripped her phone, but hesitated when Damian turned to face the car with wide, aggressive eyes, daring anyone to challenge him. "Sit the hell down," Damian barked, his voice gravelly with rage, spittle flying from cracked lips. "This don't concern you." No one moved. The old woman whimpered, clutching her arm, her fingers already swelling. Damian, clutching the purse, backed toward the center of the car, eyes flaring with that unstable confidence born from dominance. But Jason had already closed his book and slipped it into his coat. He stood slowly, casually, like a man stretching after a long ride. There was no bravado in the way he moved, just purpose. Jason removed his sunglasses and tilted his head slightly, scanning the injured woman, then the thief. Damian noticed him for the first time, and to his credit, he hesitated. Something about this man, his calm, his poise, the way he stood perfectly balanced, weight on the balls of his feet, triggered a fighter's intuition. "You got something to say?" Damian snarled, stepping forward with one foot, the stolen purse clutched in one hand like a sack of cash. Jason didn't reply. His gaze was level, cold. A few other passengers began whispering among themselves, some recognizing the man, now revealed without his shades. The name floated in the air, Jason Statham. Damian didn't flinch. He'd never cared much for Hollywood tough guys. He'd fought in real cages. He'd drawn real blood. But Jason wasn't acting now. He didn't need a script or stunt team. He was no longer the celebrity riding anonymously underground. In this moment, he was something else entirely. A veteran of real-life rough streets, a man trained by years of combat choreography and stunt coordination so intense it blurred the line between performance and reality. Most importantly, he was a man who had just witnessed a coward attack someone defenseless. And that was a line Jason never tolerated. The air inside the car changed. Every eye was now on the two men, the predator and the guardian, the disgraced fighter and the unlikely witness. Damian smirked and raised his free hand into a loose fighting stance. "What, you gonna choreograph me into submission?" He taunted, unaware that this wasn't Jason's first real fight. Jason finally spoke, his voice quiet, measured. "Put the purse down. Walk away." The words weren't shouted. It didn't need to be. They carried a weight that made more than one passenger shiver. Damian's smile faltered, just slightly, but he masked it with a laugh. "You think I'm scared of a damn actor?" he barked and raised his fists higher. Jason took a single step forward. The silence that followed Jason's quiet command was the kind that tightens around the throat. Thick, suspended, electric. The entire subway car, bathed in flickering fluorescent light, held its breath. The rogue fighter stood coiled and snarling. Gripping the elderly woman's handbag like a trophy, he refused to give up. Jason Statham, ever composed, took another calm step forward. Not rushing, not lunging, but with the kind of deliberate intent that communicated one clear message. This ends now. Damian, the Viper, Vassel had been in over 100 fights. Amateur, professional, street, and illegal. He'd seen fighters bluff, he'd seen them crumble, and he'd seen the rare ones who meant every damn word they said. And the way this man in the dark coat moved, the controlled posture, the unblinking stare, the silence, set off alarm bells in every instinct he still trusted. It wasn't the face he vaguely recognized from action films. It was the presence. Jason didn't need to announce who he was. He was who he was. Still, Damian couldn't back down. Not now. Not in front of all these people. His pulse was pounding, and adrenaline was turning reason into static. "You want this bag?" Damian hissed, lifting it up like a challenge. "Come take it, movie star." Jason's reply was movement. It wasn't a charge or a dramatic leap, just a sudden, fluid blur as he closed the distance in a heartbeat. He didn't go for the bag. He went for the wrist. His left hand clamped around Damian's forearm with surgical precision, his thumb digging into the pressure point just above the thief's wrist bone, and the purse fell instantly. Jason didn't even glance as it hit the floor. The woman gasped, pulling back in her seat, eyes wide in disbelief. Damian's growl turned to a sharp curse, but Jason wasn't done. With a pivot of his hips and a twist of his arm, he turned the rogue fighter's own strength against him, slamming him face first into the vertical pole in the center of the train. Metal clanged. Passengers flinched. A woman screamed. Blood trickled from Damian's lip as he rebounded, stunned but not down. "Not yet. You picked the wrong ride," Jason said flatly. Damian wiped his mouth with the back of his hoodie sleeve and charged. His background in MMA was real, and though his form was a little off from drug use and time away from the cage, his punches still came fast and mean. A right cross tore through the air where Jason's jaw had been a split second before. A low left jab followed, aimed at the ribs. Jason deflected it with his elbow, sidestepped, and drove a quick knee into Damian's thigh. A disabling move, not a flashy one. This wasn't choreography. This was tactical combat. Damian backed up, limping slightly now, fury overtaking strategy. "You think you're better than me?" he spat, and launched into a wild spinning elbow strike meant to knock Jason's head sideways. But Jason ducked and drove his palm upward into the exposed underarm of the spinning man, then used that momentum to grab his hoodie and slam him against the door of the subway car. The whole cabin shook. People had stopped pretending to look away now. Phones were recording. Gasps came from all corners of the train. Jason didn't seem to care. He was in control of himself, of the fight, of the environment. But Damian had one more card to play. From under his hoodie, his hand emerged clutching a small, jagged-edged switchblade. Cheap, rusty, but deadly at close range. He lunged. Jason reacted instantly. Years of stunt work and Krav Maga training exploded into instinct. He stepped inside the arc of the knife, one arm swiping the blade hand wide while his other elbowed into Damian's face with a brutal crunch. Nose broken. The blade clattered to the floor. Jason kicked it down the train car. Damian staggered, but didn't fall. Blood pouring from his face, he swung again. This time desperate, sloppy, all rage. Jason ducked low, his shoulder slamming into Damian's gut, lifting the larger man clean off his feet and slamming him hard onto the subway floor. The impact echoed down the steel walls. Damian groaned, twitching, barely conscious. Jason knelt beside him, not to finish him, but to speak. Quietly. "Close. You don't hurt people who can't fight back," he said, voice like gravel soaked in calm fury. "You don't take what's not yours. You don't terrorize people and expect to walk away." Damian tried to lift a hand. Jason pressed it down gently, firmly. "You're done." At that moment, the train hissed to a halt at the next station. The doors whooshed open. Several passengers bolted out in panic, yelling for security. Jason stood, exhaled, and adjusted his coat. A few stunned riders stared at him with awe. He looked at them all, then down at the injured woman, who was now crying, not just from pain but relief. He walked to her slowly, kneeling beside her seat. "Are you okay, love?" he asked, voice soft now, the fight stripped from it. She nodded shakily, one hand still holding the purse like it was a lifeline. "I think so," she whispered. "I didn't think anyone would stop him." Jason nodded. Well, someone did. A uniformed MTA officer appeared at the door, breathless, followed by two more. Jason stood tall. He tried to rob her, attacked her, and pulled a knife. "It's all on phones," he said, gesturing to the stunned passengers, some of whom nodded and held up their recordings. The officers looked down at the barely conscious Damian Vassel, muttered into their radios, then called in medical assistance. They handcuffed the rogue fighter with little resistance. The former MMA fighter, once feared in cages and alleys, was now just a broken man on a subway floor. One of the cops turned to Jason. "Sir, are you?" Jason shook his head. "I'm no one. Just a guy who was reading the paper." He retrieved the discarded newspaper from his seat and stepped off the train, disappearing into the station like smoke and wind, leaving behind silence, justice, and a car full of people who would never forget what they'd seen. The platform of the next station buzzed with a kind of energy that didn't quite belong underground. The EMTs were already wheeling out Damian Vassel, his once imposing body strapped to a gurney, face swollen and smeared with drying blood. An officer trailed close, not just for escort, but protection. After what they'd seen on the phone videos, some riders were seconds from delivering justice of their own. Jason Statham, however, had already disappeared into the crowd, slipping away before the flashbulbs arrived. Just the way he liked it. Back on the subway, the elderly woman was being attended to. Her name was Margaret Holloway, an 82-year-old retired schoolteacher, and she hadn't stopped clutching her purse since the moment it hit the floor. She kept trying to sit up despite the EMT's advice. "He didn't even look at me," she said softly, like I was nothing. By the time she was escorted to an ambulance, news vans had already gathered like vultures near the station entrance. Somewhere between the passengers, uploaded videos, and the frantic calls to 911, word had gotten out, not just about the attempted robbery, but about the mystery man who stopped it. The footage wasn't shaky iPhone chaos. It was a crystal-clear, wide-angle view of a man in a black coat moving like a seasoned fighter, disabling a larger assailant with calm, lethal grace. And even under the shadow of a cap, the internet had no trouble identifying him, Jason Statham. Within hours, hashtag Statham Subway Fight was trending worldwide. Despite Jason's best efforts to avoid the limelight, the media had sunk its teeth into the story. Every outlet, from TMZ to CNN, was covering it. Some hailed him a hero. Others questioned the legality of his intervention. But one thing was clear: Jason hadn't just stopped a robbery. He had embodied the kind of strength people only ever saw in films. And this time, it had happened in the real world. Jason, meanwhile, had quietly returned to his hotel. He'd canceled a talk show appearance and turned off his phone. He wasn't interested in interviews or photo ops. He wasn't acting. He hadn't done it for clicks or PR. He'd done it because it was right. But his publicist was already knocking at his door. "Jason, they want you on Good Morning America. You're trending. You're a national hero." Jason looked up from the newspaper in his hand, the same one he'd carried on the train. The headline now had his face on it, albeit a blurry one mid-punch. "I'm not interested in being anyone's hero," he said calmly. "Let the old woman tell her story. That's the one that matters." And Margaret did tell her story. In an interview given from her recovery bed at Mount Sinai Hospital, she spoke clearly and without bitterness. She didn't cry. She didn't dramatize. "I've lived through a lot," she said. "Lost a husband. Raised 3 kids. Saw New York change a dozen times. But nothing shook me like that man grabbing my bag and looking at me like I didn't matter. Like I was just a thing. But then this man stood up, not yelling, not puffing up like he wanted attention. He just did the right thing. He put himself between me and someone dangerous. And he didn't say his name. He didn't act like a star. He acted like a man." The clip went viral. People from all over the world commented, shared, tweeted, and blogged. It wasn't just about the action. It was about decency. About being brave when you didn't have to be. About being present. Jason hadn't made it about him, but the world had. He became a symbol overnight. Not of Hollywood brawn, but of integrity. Meanwhile, Damian Vassel was formally charged with assault, attempted robbery, and possession of a weapon. The arrest record made waves in the fight community. Once hailed as a ferocious rising talent, Damian's fall from grace became a case study in wasted potential. But unlike other criminals who faded into obscurity, Damian had to live with the added humiliation of being dropped. Not by another fighter, but by an actor. That detail burned hotter than any bruise. Back in his gym in Los Angeles, Jason kept his routine tight. He trained early, avoided crowds, and brushed off attempts from journalists to get a quote. He only broke silence once, in a handwritten note posted quietly on his personal website. "I didn't do anything special. I did what any decent person should do when they see someone vulnerable being hurt. If that surprises people, maybe we've stopped expecting enough from ourselves. Look out for each other. That's it. JS." Margaret Holloway framed the quote and kept it on her nightstand. Weeks passed, and while the internet churned onto newer trends, the story had left a mark. A group of New York subway commuters started a campaign called Stand Up NYC, encouraging riders to look out for one another instead of turning a blind eye. Posters went up. Volunteer escorts were organized for elderly riders. And at the heart of it all was the viral image of Jason rising from his seat, calm and alert, seconds before the first punch. It became iconic. Eventually, Jason was offered the chance to portray himself in a dramatized version of the incident for a streaming series. He declined. "They've seen the real thing," he said. "Let's stay real." Months later, Jason received a small package in the mail. No return address, just a neat handwritten label. To the man who reminded us not all heroes wear capes or need cameras. Inside was a hand-crocheted scarf, navy blue and gold, and a photo of Margaret smiling beside her great-granddaughter. A simple note beneath it read, "You're always welcome at our dinner table. Just bring dessert." Jason smiled for the first time in weeks.